When we think of multiculturalism, we do need to have perspective because those perceptions also coming from other consumers that are your colleagues, those perceptions are built in because of their own reality. And a lot of times those perceptions are built in to marketing strategies and final creative product. And those perceptions are not right. It's not because they are intentional, it's because they don't have that perspective. So a lot of times things are driven in the marketing world by perception of those that have the power to create, but it's not being driven by those that have the perspective to create.
Welcome to Endless Coffee Cup, a regular discussion of marketing news, culture, and media for our complex digital lifestyle. Join Matt Bailey as he engages in conversation to find insights beyond the latest headlines and deeper understanding for those involved in marketing. Grab a cup of coffee, have a seat, and thanks for joining.
Well, hello, dear listener, and welcome to another edition of the Endless Coffee Cup. And we have a brand new guest today, one that I'm very excited about. Gabby and I met months ago at an Association of National Advertisers conference. And I will say this is what keeps the podcast going, is it's to mimic the conversations you have at conferences, at get-togethers, and I think Gabby and I, we could have talked for hours, but Gabriela Alcantra-Diaz, and you're from the Florida area and dealing in multiculturalism, which I found just to be so fascinating and certainly worth more than just one episode here at the Endless Coffee Cup. Gabby, could you maybe give us a little bit of a background and introduce yourself, please?
Well, thank you, Matt. It was such an interesting conversation that we had, and I'm so glad that I met you and actually enjoyed thoroughly your presentation
Great.
on data analytics, and I've used some of your tips actually in our presentations. It was very enlightening because I think as marketers, sometimes we tend to overtalk and overpresent, and having a visual, right, that delivers your main message is so key in storytelling. So that was my key takeaway from your presentation and your highlights.
Thank you.
So as you mentioned, I've been in multicultural for quite some time. Proud to say that I've been in the business for over 30 years, and I started right out of college here in Miami, Florida, and I was actually born in Uruguay in South America, a small country nestled between Brazil and Argentina. And as my late mother would always say, Uruguay was the Swiss of the Americas. So she was a proud Uruguayan. I consider myself an Uruguayan American. I came at the age of 5, was a Spanish speaker, and basically was raised in the States and raised a family here. Proud to say I've got 2 wonderful U.S.-born Hispanic American children. So with regards to multicultural, an interesting insight is that, at that time, I really didn't even know what multicultural was. I thought that I was just a typical American kid that was born in another country, but was American and had parents that were immigrants.
Right.
And that led my career to really understanding the needs of a multicultural marketplace in the U.S.
That is so intriguing. I mean, I love to hear that story. And yeah, I heard a little bit more detail before. And I think that's just an amazing thing that you just thought you were like everybody else. And I think isn't that the goal of multiculturalism? Is that inclusiveness, that I'm just like everybody else here, making people feel comfortable in their own skin, so to speak.
Exactly. And I think what was very unique to Miami at that time, even though I was a Hispanic American, I was raised in a community where the largest share of Hispanics at that time were Cuban Americans back in the early 70s. And then we had obviously a very large, what we call, and try to sort of structure the conversation around non-Hispanic whites, because again, Hispanics come in multiple races differences. We've got, ethnic profiles that come from all parts of the world, including Europe, and obviously during Hispanic Heritage Month. But basically, it was interesting because we had African Americans, we had the Jewish community, but we all were unique in our ways. But what brought us together was this American dream, the American community, and understanding that, really, even to this day, taking the best of both worlds. Oftentimes it's like there's a saying that there's the American way where it's much more structured, and you've got the ability to follow certain rules or laws. And then you have the Mediterranean culture where, when you think of family values or just the family gatherings, the more codependency and group thinking. So it was really the melding of all that, then to see the influence of the Haitian American community, that the West Indies, that impacted the Black community in South Florida. It just makes it for such an enriching community, enriching experiences, really.
Oh, absolutely. I am so fascinated by my father's stories. So he grew up in Newport, Rhode Island, in the 40s and 50s. And at that time, it was a huge naval town. And he tells me stories that, of all the different people that lived nearby, and the landlord, she was from Greece, was a first generation immigrant, and her husband owned these properties, and he would go down to the store, and just this richness that was part of his childhood. And then even as an adult, meeting some of those people that he grew up with, and all around that there are many times that I feel like, growing up in the Midwest, I kind of missed out on a lot of that, because especially when you are part of a community, what you're describing, there's just this richness, this experience of different cultures and what they value, and I'm sorry, the food. And those are some things that it's very similar to what I hear my father's stories as well.
Yeah, that's interesting because food and music to a degree, but food really brings everyone to the table. And you have no barriers, you don't have any judgment. And I think food is a great metaphor because it really just brings people together. And when you bring people together, you start conversations. And by starting conversations, you intrigue individuals and you want to learn more, and you sort of open your heart to folks. And I just find it that, even coming from the advertising agency world, I think that there's also a parallel where you work on various categories, various industries and clients. And at the end of the day, things are not really that different in terms of the marketing approach. I mean, yeah, you sort of fine tune the strategy. And the same thing happens with people. We sort of all just want to be embraced. We want to be respected. We want to be acknowledged. And, we have a lot more in common, but understanding those subtleties makes it for even a more richer conversation. I find myself always exploring personalities because I think that, when you think of the Greek wedding, that huge hit, I mean, it was just so wonderful because I could relate to some of those things, but part of the entertainment value of that movie was the cultural uniqueness of the Greek American community. And I'm purposely focusing on that community to say that the same happens with Hispanic Americans that come from different parts. The same thing is happening with Black Americans, with the growth of immigrant Blacks that are coming from other parts of the world, in addition to the growth of the African American that has been here for generations. So the uniqueness in those personalities is what makes it so fun, entertaining, and interesting. I find it extremely, extremely interesting. It's my passion. What can I tell you?
Well, I could tell, yes. And you do such a great job, not so much of selling it, but positioning and showing the reality of it, but also the attractiveness of it. But I want to get to, let's just start at the very top. why should companies be aware of multiculturalism in their marketing? I'm going to throw you a big softball.
When you think of multiculturalism, right? America, as we all know, has been built on multiculturalism, right?
Right.
Talking to your dad's story, and you think of the influence of Italian Americans, the Jewish community that came in, the Greek, the Germans. So when you look at multiculturalism and you look at the youth factor, we also have to be thinking about a labor force. We have to be thinking about our business operational models, and we can't be short-sighted. As we all know, we're building business plans, right, that are 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead. So you've got to make sure that you're implementing structures that really are relating to this transition in the marketplace. And it is transformative. When you look at the millennial community and the Gen Zs, over 50% or more in the Gen Z are
Mm.
multicultural. Obviously, when you break down then the percents, that multiculturalism, when you look at the pie and the share of the pie, it is driven by the Hispanic community. Right now, the latest census data, we know that 62 million Hispanics are here. Now, when you start thinking of multiculturalism, again, it's talking to the issue of cultural norms, relationship building, language issues, preference and categories, to branding strategies where you may have, let's say, an allegiance to a certain brand because of your heritage with that brand that maybe was influenced by family structure. You've got the cross-cultural complex dynamic where cross-cultural now, as we all know, going back to food, a lot of the food influence is not being driven by mainstream America.
Hmm.
Food strategies are being driven by global taste. And at the end of the day, America is a microcosm of the entire world, and we have it right here, and we're not taking advantage of it.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And one of the most fascinating things, just to reinforce that, we just came through the Olympics. And that's one thing I absolutely love is when the American athletes come in and it looks like we took people from all of the other teams and put them on our team. It's just a great, great picture of America because you have everything going on there, and it makes the other nations look very. Monochromatic, almost boring because, we've got everybody. But yeah, I mean, just the food thing. I know I used to do a lot of travel. Now I don't. One of the things I've always tried to do is when I experience the food, when I come home, I want to reproduce that. I laugh about vegetarian food in America has got to be the most boring thing in the world. But you go to other countries and the vegetarian dishes are amazing. And I'm like, this is what would appeal to people if they wanted to eat more, vegetarian dishes is go see what other people are doing. So that there's so much to celebrate and enjoy about experiencing these different cultures and even something through the travel of just learning to appreciate the differences rather than I'll give one example from one of my travels. I had a manager that I traveled and we were in Costa Rica and he was getting upset that his coffee cup was not filled immediately after the meal. And I'm kinda telling him, "Look, if this is gonna upset you, this is gonna be a long trip." I said, "You gotta be prepared to sit here for 2 or 3 hours. Otherwise, you're not gonna be." And he just kept getting angrier that, "What kind of service, are they gonna have here?" I'm like, "You need to just calm down. This is gonna last a while."
Right. It's the expectation, which is interesting,
Yes.
right? It's the expectation because in Costa Rica, part of the beauty of the culture is that they don't want to push you out, which happens in the US and a lot of the Hispanic restaurants.
Right.
They want you to stay because it's all really about conversation.
Yes.
The coffee is just an instrument to really generate conversation and have you enjoy the moment. It's not the other way around.
I love that.
So there's an issue of perception of time. There's the issue of perception of socializing and the purpose of the gathering.
Absolutely. That's one thing that absolutely struck me when I was in Spain and I asked about a reservation. And that's when I learned that in Spain, when you reserve a table, you reserve the table all night. It's not like here in America, you get it, and for 45 minutes, it's yours, and you got to get out. And I'm like, I love this culture. I love this. They want you to sit around, and I'm going to take what you just said and make it a soundbite to promote the podcast because that's exactly what I'm going for. So you get it. I love it.
I get it. But if I can, Matt, talking about I thought you hit it on the nose with regards to the Olympian. I posted something on LinkedIn this last weekend. Like, we're focusing on Hispanic heritage, and Semilla Multicultural, which is our advertising agency. We've got two agencies, which actually I didn't talk about at the beginning. I'm not very good at branding the agencies because I want to get right into the market information for you. But
right.
Our focus was all about, we want to focus on understanding my roots. And what we're finding is, Hispanic heritage is wonderful, and a lot of companies will come out and they take the month, and that's wonderful. But at the end of the day, we are no less Hispanic Americans before or after Hispanic heritage, the same way that we're no less Americans before 4th of July and after 4th of July. It's the same metaphor. So we're Hispanic Americans throughout the year. And what we're also finding, because of the growth of the U.S. born Hispanic, a lot of younger Hispanics are really trying to understand their roots. And although, again, I've been in this industry for 30 years, and we've heard about how they're sort of, reinvigorating their heritage. But now, because they're at the forefront of this transformation in America, and because of the digital transformation, having a voice that they choose to say what they want to say in whatever language they please, they are really trying to understand and truly understand what their roots. So there's this whole battle right now that's even happening in the Hispanic world, where it is about, we've got indigenous heritage, we have European heritage, we have Afro heritage. And a lot of the younger Hispanics are battling with that and trying to understand where do they fit in all of that. So it was interesting, in the U.S. Open, you had these two young women. Multiculturalism is not only in America, it is happening globally. And you had these two women that they were both born in Canada, mind you, but to different types of ethnic groups. The one that won, I can't remember her name right now. She basically was born in Canada, but her mother was Filipino, I believe, and Romanian.
Yes.
And then the other was, her father was from Ecuador Chinese. And then I think the Ecuadorian, Filipino, something like that. But it was just the whole multicultural spectrum. So one person that follows me on LinkedIn, what was it? She's Filipino, and she's proud of it. So the fact that I acknowledge that.
Yes.
So, these women that are on the global stage representing the U.S. Open are racially and ethnically diverse.
That's fantastic. I love it because I think ultimately when you look up to people, you want to feel that can be me. I can do that. And when they look like you, when they have a background like you, I think that does a lot more inspiration because you can place yourself there. And that's so important. And it's great to see, in the tennis world, how, it's so much more diverse and so much more talent. And I kind of think back in the days where, it's very much, monochromatic. And sometimes I equate that even into our marketing industry. We were just at a conference, months ago, and especially the more tech-oriented the conference, I think the more monochromatic it gets. And you lose something there. And this is something I'd rather you go into, but what do you lose when you don't have influence from other cultures, from other viewpoints when you're developing a marketing plan? Or, we can even go bigger picture than that. But what do you lose when you don't have that?
I really think that you just lose perspective. There are a couple of things because we focus a lot on Latina driven strategies. We've been doing it. We focus on the upward mobility of Hispanic Americans and also focus a lot on Hispanic women. But I think that women in general need to have a place at the table, regardless of what color and race. It doesn't really matter. I think that the conversation you and I were having earlier about the gymnast,
Yes.
one of the questions that was asked by the senators, one senator, a female senator, I believe, was there a female FBI investigator? And the reason why I bring this up is if it happens at that level, marketing is, but if it's happening at societal level, where to be able to have the sensitivities, and it's not because it's right or wrong, it's because it's a female, it's part of your world. Like as a woman, I know when I watch certain movies, especially foreign movies that are directed by women, I know it off the bat without even knowing that it was a woman director because there's a sensitivity in the images, the way that the woman is portrayed, and just little subtleties and things that you just know that only a woman could have thought about. So if you think of it from a macro perspective and starting just with the macro gender, we need more women. And then when we think of multiculturalism, we do need to have perspective because those perceptions also coming from other consumers that are your colleagues, those perceptions are built in because of their own reality. And a lot of times those perceptions are built in to marketing strategies and final creative product. And those perceptions are not right. It's not because they are intentional, it's because they don't have that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times things are driven in the marketing world by perception of those that have the power to create, but it's not being driven by those that have the perspective to create.
Wow, that is powerful. The difference between power and perspective. So let's talk about what happens when a campaign like that is developed. What's a great example of a clumsy multicultural campaign?
Yeah, and I'm not going to name brands because I think at a larger level, what's happening also is, we talk about pop culture in general, and we know that pop culture oftentimes is influenced by the creative minds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those creative minds are probably a lot more open-minded to multiculturalism and non-gender bias, with the LGBTQ communities and all of that. But by the same token, I think that marketers then sort of take on that approach, but they don't go deep. So they may highlight multiculturalism, just sheer packaging, but they're not necessarily going in deep into having a conversation with that multicultural group. And again, allowing for that storytelling to come from perspective versus perception. And I think those two P's are critical for the future.
Yeah.
Because again, what connects them is the power. So are you going to give the power to people that have a perception of multiculturalism? Or are you going to give the power to those that have a true perspective of multiculturalism?
That is great. I mean, the difference, I from what I hear you saying, the difference is checking the box versus what's the story? How do we genuinely portray this rather than, And I think a lot of times when you approach it as checking the box, we have to have multicultural here. You end up with a stereotype. You end up and and I will say there's a lot of stereotypes that are very, very true. And I think done the right way with a community that can laugh at it about itself, it works, and that's really seems to work. But approaching it with a check the box mentality, like you said, that leads to perception, and which then results in a very clumsy campaign where people, oof, after they see that, oh, that's, I hope, how are they getting away with this?
But if you play on stereotypes, for example, we're experts in multicultural, right? So we've developed strategies from the ground up and evaluating the categories and then understanding what the brand strategy should be. So, for example, one of our clients, we understand there's a shift in immigration and also the changing face of Hispanic America.
hmm
So we basically took two ethnicities, and we understand that also oftentimes the language and the way that it's spoken, depending on who you are and where you come from in Latin America and also raised in the US, you use certain words differently. So the whole commercial was based off on that, on making fun of it, but understanding that going deep was that the way a Colombian uses the word gift is very different to the way a recent arrival Cuban American uses it. But we were able to, it was a humorous spot, but there was humor because it truly came from that, like we always like to say, the semilla, the origin of a pure idea. The purity of that idea really came from a cultural insight that allowed us to have humor.
That is such a great example, because that was my next question. I asked you for a clumsy campaign. You avoided it, which kudos to you. Great job. But you explained it more. And then you gave me a phenomenal example, which is my next question. And I love that because, yeah, that's what you mean by going deep, that you have to understand these nuances. And because it's a bridge, it divides, but it's a bridge because it helps us understand one another. But also, there is a lot of, I mean, what you explained is there's a big playground to find these opportunities when you have that deeper understanding of what's being developed and what's happening on the ground. I always joke about if artists have a blank slate, they have more frustration. They don't know what to create. But I remember telling an artist, okay, you have a 3-inch by 5-inch space, and it has to have this shade of color, and this is what else is on the page. And immediately they're complaining like you're restricting my creativity. But then ultimately, what they realize is they had more creativity. They had more to work with because of the restrictions. It enabled more freedom, more how about approach with this. And I think that's so exactly what you explain here, that you really drilled into a very specific idea and then had fun with it. I love that.
Exactly. And so then the marketplace won't refute you, because again, the brand is working with a multicultural partner that truly understands those nuances and can really honestly speak to the marketplace without having the fear that they're going to make a mistake. And and to your point about the artist, it makes for better theater. And when it makes it for better theater, it makes it for better and greater business results because you further engage consumers. Consumers remember, when we worked on a platform for one of our largest clients that we had years ago, our leadership team, the platform was all about enriching relationships. It was about enriching. But for the non-Hispanic white consumer, it was really about that relationship was based on simplification. Whereas for the Hispanic consumer, it was about enriching the relationship. So the brand benefit was slightly different how to get to that relationship. So for me, I want your relationship if you can simplify my life from a non-Hispanic white, but from a Hispanic consumer, I want to build a relationship with you if you can enrich my life, not simplify my life. So that brings it again to a macro platform. So, in our agency with Semilla Multicultural, again, because we're bicultural and we're multicultural, we understand the dynamics of a brand strategy. And again, and we always say that your Hispanic strategy, your multicultural strategy that brings in a Hispanic approach is really to drive, at the end of the day, your business. That's what you're here for. Obviously with that, you want to expand your purpose in the marketplace, obviously, and you want to drive sales, you want to build your business, but at the end of the day, you hope to also make a footprint in the marketplace. And I always like to give the example. We've handled many brands throughout the years, and we've had brands that we've had for 23 years over 3 different agencies. And to be able to then go and see how Hispanic marketers also, now I'm getting into more of the purpose-driven messaging and understanding our legacy, that you can come full circle and also use your platform to bring back to the community. Because, at the end of the day, we want to elevate the Hispanic community. We want to enrich the Hispanic community. And we know that there's the evolution of Hispanic America is here, and there is upward mobility. So to be able to say that now you've got, certain supermarkets in local Hispanic neighborhoods because of what you did, or the fact that you have brands that in fact drove sales for off-premise companies, and mom and pop shops because of what you were able to do in the marketplace, it means something. It really does.
If you are a regular listener of Endless Coffee Cup, well, I love coffee. If you are listening for the first time, then the name of the podcast should be a big clue. I love conversation, and I think that we have a lot to learn from each other if we only take the time to sit and talk over a cup of coffee. Maybe we'll come to a resolution, maybe not, but at least we've learned from each other. It's in this spirit that I'm happy to announce a regular sponsor of the Endless Coffee Cup, a coffee sponsor. In Care of Coffee is a coffee company that is unique in the market. They are directly tied to the communities that produce coffee and ensure that the proceeds go to the coffee farmers, the local producers, and their communities. There are no middlemen or markups. The proceeds from the sales go directly to the communities that work so hard to bring us the enjoyment of a great cup of coffee. Go to incareofcoffee.com, follow the link in the notes, and use the code ENDLESS to get 10% off your order. Again, that's the discount code ENDLESS to get 10% off your order. I'm enjoying the whole bean Huehuetenango coffee today. Please support our sponsor and know that your support goes directly to the farmers, producers, and communities that help power us here at the Endless Coffee Cup podcast. I'm fascinated because of, how, and this gets to brand perception. Earlier, what you explained, where how a brand is perceived, the messaging is perceived differently based on the values of the target audience. And what I love about that is, even though we're saying that there is, non-Hispanic whites value this and Hispanics value this, what I love about this, it's not true for 100%. That there is crossover, there is different perceptions, but to build your messaging, to say that not only are we simplifying, but we can also bring more value, deepen that relationship. There are people that look for both of those on both sides. And what it does is it makes your brand richer, and you're adding a more value and more benefit to it by explaining, here's what we can do, and here's another way of looking at it. It's, I equate that to, as I'm building that brand, different people have different needs, and those needs drive the perception of the brand. And when I make my brand more accessible to a certain group of people, it adds a dimension. And that dimension could be valuable to many others that I never even thought about.
Exactly. And I think that, a lot of times marketers don't necessarily think about the multicultural segment as generational, and they should be. I think that for a long time, the conversation always revolved around you've got to, you're working with immigrants, it's first generation, you're sort of establishing a relationship. Well, again, the growth of the Hispanic community is in US born Hispanics, and you may have first and second generation Hispanics that, in fact, are helping build your brand, and you need to use them to further expand your brand footprint.
Now, that's fascinating because I remember you talking about that, and I found that to be so fascinating. The generational differences in Hispanics, radically different. First generation or older to the younger generations. What's the dynamic in that? I found that so fascinating when you were explaining that.
There's sort of two things happening right now, because when you think of the US Hispanic, you have to think about Latin America, Mexico, sort of as parallels, and the Caribbean. So the digital transformation has also influenced a lot of what's happening in Latin America with regards to values, with regards to upward mobility, with access to women in the workforce. So, there's still a link, right, between some of the sort of relatives and friends, the back and forth. And then within the US, you also, because you have second generations already, born and raised, and now you've got a third generation that are here as, again, third generation Hispanic Americans still living in the same neighborhoods or possibly moving, is that those values are starting to shift. So there's some common denominators, with regards to family and progress and education, but we're seeing it in the political spectrum. We're seeing it with issues that have to do with civil rights,
Mm.
And the discourse is happening at the dinner table with generations where you may have more conservative grandparents, but then you've got more liberal grandchildren,
Mm.
and they're trying to find a midpoint, and they're both influencing each other. So marketers need to understand that there's still a lot of interdependency to a degree, but also that inter-influence. Those discussions are happening at a greater level in Hispanic households than they are possibly in the sort of general market or the non-Hispanic households.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. A couple of years ago, I moved my parents in with us. They've got an in-law apartment. And I will say the richness that it has added to have my parents and have frequent dinners and yes, have that dynamic, but also the awareness that that's not normal. And that's now one thing, in my travels in Central South America, that is something I've always found just wonderfully fascinating is the amount of generations that normally get together, that live together, and it only just improves the family dynamic. I'm fascinated with, I would call it the American independent culture that started around the late 40s and 50s, where becoming independent and living on your own as your own nuclear family and leaving that multi-generational way of living. And I don't know, I feel like we have lost something being a non-Hispanic white. I feel like we have lost something by pursuing that because I am thoroughly enjoying it. Has its ups and downs, but I love having my parents here. And even more, my children love having my parents close by and the relationships and the bonds. I can see where, in the Hispanic community, yes, there's much more talk, there's much more discussion. And I can only imagine that leads to greater understanding and appreciation of the more conservative grandparents, the more liberal children, and actually talking about that, which is fascinating.
Exactly. So it's important to understand that, because for marketers, when you're really, speaking to that consumer, it's really not just an independent voice.
Mm.
And it also happens with the digital navigation, where oftentimes, the Sherpas, these Hispanic digital navigators that are proficient in English, they're doing their own searches for themselves, but also they're helping possibly a Spanish dominant cousin or grandmother. I have a friend that his 93-year-old mom loves Instagram. And she is constantly always commenting in Spanish, and she's known me since I was 16, and so, and then her grandkids live all over the US and the world. And they just love visiting her in Miami so they can have her flan and her Cuban food. So it just, those roots. And I go back to during Hispanic Heritage Month, what our agency Semilla is trying to do too is understanding my roots. And I think that that's where we are right now. And I would venture to say that a lot of folks like yourself, there's so much richness that your parents and your grandparents brought to America, that it's just a beautiful gift that you can give your children to have their grandparents around, like a history book. And it's live. It's live. They can share, they can talk. And, that's priceless. Nothing can replace that.
Oh no, not at all. Not at all. Two of my daughters have learned how to quilt because of being around their grandmother. So I absolutely love it. It's really added so much here. Being exposed to the Hispanic family structure, it's something my wife and I had noticed very quickly and saw that there's something special there and it can be appreciated. And I think also from a marketing perspective, because my mind works that way too, there's more than one decision maker in that house. There's multiple decision makers, and you've got to be aware of that. You can't use the old model. You've got to accommodate those types of approaches as you approach the Hispanic market.
Right. Exactly. Yep. It's an interesting. It made me think about another commercial that we did. That was a little humorous, but that it just talks about, you and I earlier were talking about pageantry and, the beauty industry and how that influences women and young women. And in certain parts of Latin America, which carries over to the U.S. Hispanic for certain ethnic groups, beauty is it's high valued as an attribute, and it's societal. And this commercial in particular, a product is given for free, but the daughter and the mother are, they're getting the free product, and then obviously the mother thinks that she's getting the free product because, she's so pretty and all of this, and then her daughter sort of stops her on her tracks, in her tracks and says to her in English, everybody gets it for free, mother. It's like, it's not because you're beautiful, but coming from the daughter, and for this particular ethnic group, again, it speaks to the colloquialism of that particular ethnic group and how beauty plays a role. But again, the daughter is the only one that can tell her, listen, it's not because of your beauty. So those are the kind of things, intergenerational and humor. And humor plays really well in the Hispanic market, if done well, mm-hmm. and done authentically. And again, we always like to say, you've got to peel the onion. You've got to peel the onion. And the more you do that, or you start with the essence of a pure idea, and it starts with that seed of an idea. But it's got to be pure. It can't be muddled through perception, and that's where a lot of marketers blunder.
Well, I think you said it when you said humor done well is powerful. There's so much wrapped up in those two words. Done well. Yeah, and unfortunately, I think there's a lot of blunders in humor. And it requires that deeper knowledge of how is this going to be perceived? Will everyone perceive this the same way? There's a lot wrapped up in that done well statement. I think we've seen too much of things done not well, and that certainly colors
Yes.
the perception of. And I always tell people, humor's great. Humor's great. Watch out, but humor's great.
Exactly, exactly. And we are a kind of jolly community. I mean, we are festive, vibrant, and again, there's certain personality attributes. I mean, you don't want to generalize because that's what happens a lot of times. It's easy, like you said, check off the box, and then you generalize. And those folks that are maybe managing your business through perception, not perspective. I think I'm going to coin that. I kind of like that. I don't know, Matt. You're making me think a lot. Um,
You've been used. Well, oh, wow. Oh, that's awesome. I have never heard that as a compliment, but I'll take it.
but it's the jolly and the vibrancy and how you can exude that in that connection, that brand connection with the Hispanic market. But again, it's about doing it well, and you can only do it well by really starting with that pure idea, that pure insight, and you've got to peel the onion. You've got to do the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm reminded. So I've been doing a lot of work in the Middle East the past year. And one thing that was shared with me by some of my students is I think it's an Instagram, but there's also a website called Arabs of Shutterstock. And it is absolutely cringy because it's all stock photos of Arabs, and they're pointing out, here's why it's bad. No one wears their headdress like that. Nobody does this. Nobody, and it's ridiculing the clumsy attempts of stock photography to capture the Arab community. And that has turned into an entertainment unto itself. Is look at what people are trying to impose. Look at their view here, and they have no understanding of the culture, no understanding of the dress, and So finding those, I call it. It's like finding gold, because wow, from an outsider perspective, that helps me understand them so much more. And maybe when you said humor done well, I also like to say we learn very quickly through ridicule. Uh, so when I see something being ridiculed, I learn very quickly, oh no, don't do that. There has to be an active awareness of observation, especially when working with a community. You can't go in with an idea of this is what I want to get accomplished, because if you do that, you're going to miss the nuance. You're going to miss the opportunity to learn something greater. And every time I'm with a different culture, it has to be an active awareness of what's happening and what can I learn just from observation of a situation, a conversation. Without that mentality, you're going to blunder. And sometimes, yeah, you'll make mistakes anyway, but if you've shown your openness, it'll be accepted, because I can't expect someone to understand my Midwestern culture. We do some weird things, and I can't expect anyone just to step right in and do everything culturally right or sensitive. And honestly, don't worry about it. Uh, so yeah, I think it requires that awareness. That's what you're going to learn from.
Exactly. And then, but you're inviting, if you have someone that's coming from the East Coast and is not familiar, doesn't go to the Midwest, it's like you're probably so proud and you would love, right, to embrace that person and really speak about what makes you so interesting.
Hmm.
And the same thing happens across the US. I mean, we're a huge country. When I go back to Uruguay, and I'm sure it happens with a lot of, multicultural consumers that still have family back in other countries, I'm the one that sometimes has to say to them, well, not all Americans are like this. It's like America, because they also have a perception.
Yes.
So I'm there defending and not saying, what you're seeing is not America. It's not our true Americans. And it's the
Hmm.
same thing. You can go to Texas, and I mean, we all have such unique areas across the US because of all those immigrant groups. I mean, the Germans were so influential in the Midwest, right?
Right.
You've got, I mean, here in Tampa, they still celebrate like the largest Cuban sandwich. I mean, a lot of Americans may not know that in Tampa, you had a large influx of Cubans and the Greeks, the cigar factories that started in Ybor City.
Yes.
It wasn't in Miami, it was in Tampa.
Right, right. I remember going there. That's a wonderful trip.
So I just think that, in general, I think companies, where I think at the forefront of multicultural, we know that it's really about marketing and operations. I think we're having to understand where obviously diversity and equity and inclusiveness, where is this all going to guide? There was obviously a lot of conversation that took place last year, and we'll see where that goes. It requires training. It requires, again, having perspective from the right individuals and not perception. Because if we continue to work based on perception, most of the time you're going to be off track.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a valuable lesson last year that really, the job was to raise awareness and it was successful. And I think it's made a lot of companies question now, how are we being perceived? And are we limiting ourselves with that perception? So I think it's been a great challenge. And to see how companies, the market, brands have reacted has been a very positive thing.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, corporate responsibility, and it takes everything. It's internal stakeholders, it's recruitment of people of color, Hispanics, African Americans. It's everything. It's not just the marketing strategy. It really isn't. It's not just if you're there for the long haul, and we've seen it ourselves. We were very instrumental and very fortunate, I guess, starting 30 years ago in Florida. When I started working with a local agency, actually, which we ended up working with the BBH of this world, the Leo Burnett's, even before BBH, was even on the map. And it was interesting to see how having those insights really even drove some of the global strategies, because there was more similarity between Hispanic Americans living in the U.S. and people in other parts of the world than Hispanic Americans and their American neighbor.
Wow. Yeah.
So for some of the global brands that we worked on, like Johnny Walker, we were really more in tune with the international mindset than even within our own borders. So I think that, again, it just requires a full-fledged commitment to the marketplace. And some of these brands, like you think of Publix supermarkets from a local standpoint, even, Amscot Financial in Florida, or you think of Pfizer, even Target to a degree, which started later in the game. Some of these companies have a footprint, but they started years and years ago, and they invested in talent in their own companies. So you have to also have that perspective inside the company. It should not just be relegated to an outside partner.
That's powerful. That is. And I love the Johnny Walker example, because I think that goes back to when you find those trends, when you find that information, it actually opened up a wider understanding and a wider market by learning that. And I'm amazed at how many people still view this with an element of resistance of multiculturalism. It's a Gen Z thing. It's the dismissiveness of the idea, when in reality you're missing opportunity. You're missing opportunity for how your brand will be perceived, and finding benefits and perceptions that you may not even know exist, but if you knew them, if you embraced them, oh my goodness, how it would change. And that is so powerful.
Yeah, I'll leave you with two things I think marketers need to think about, which is, first of all, again, understanding that the multicultural segment is younger. And as companies roll out additional business models or sort of transforming their business model or looking at new product rollouts and even expanding into other categories, think of the multicultural market as they leapfrog. So, what you were maybe doing with your general audience 10 years ago and you continue to do, you basically are just going to leapfrog and go right into a new prototype product, possibly an expansion of a brand series that you're looking at, or even in a business model like we talked about, transformational and digital, where we know that Hispanics in general, they live off their iPhones, they live off their mobile phones. So for them, it's a lifeline. So there's great opportunity. You're leapfrogging. You're not having to basically migrate them. So that's number one. Think of it as a leapfrog strategy. And secondly, oftentimes marketers will put in a lot of muscle, a lot of money, a lot of resources into product rollout. Think of your multicultural strategy as an extension of your strategy where you may have to take a Hispanic approach, and you should, to basically drive your overall goals, your business goals, but also understand that oftentimes a multicultural strategy could be very much like a new product rollout with huge rewards at the end in terms of cultivating a meaningful brand growth.
Absolutely. I often think back to sort of my early days in digital where I focused a lot on accessibility. And part of that story was the more accessible you make your website, you're opening it up for people who you've never thought about. And the best example where, we think about the ramps for wheelchairs, that helps families with strollers. It helps delivery people as it helps more people than just that intended group. And what you're explaining is the same thing, that as you explore multiculturalism, it's going to enable you to tell a richer story. Uh, Gabriella, this has been wonderful, wonderful. And I always enjoy our conversations, and I look forward to a lot more.
Me too, Matt. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my passion on multicultural.
Oh, absolutely. And as always, Gabriella, how can people find you? And here's your chance to tell us a little bit about Semilla Multicultural.
Well, thank you. As I said, I'm a 30-year veteran in the multicultural space. Semilla Multicultural has been around for 11 years. We're a creative agency consultancy of sorts, where we basically bring in research, strategy development, all the way through creative. Again, doing it right, and making sure that you're driving something with a pure insight. And we basically focus on a gamut of categories. We're very, very strong in the food and beverage, given our experience with public supermarkets and with Bird's Eye, with Johnnie Walker, with Boston Beer. So, we're sort of heavy hitters in that industry, and healthcare as well as finance. And we always like to say that with Semilla Multicultural and another agency that I actually opened last year called GADMC Inc., and it's really more of a purpose-driven agency, but collectively these sister agencies are trying to deliver on cultivating meaningful brand growth through enriching relationships with a dynamic, vibrant, and upwardly mobile Hispanic America. And that pretty much is the nutshell. And one of the things that I personally want to pursue in the next 10 years, and you and I talked about this, is how do we use our platform for better good, is we really want to continue to drive a wellness lifestyle with Hispanic America. We want to enrich communities through generating more wealth in Hispanic America. And we want to drive higher education, which leads me to a very special project that I launched last year in honor of my late mother, that was a nurse in Uruguay. And it's called Our Nurses Son Bravas. And this is a project of love where when COVID started last year, I saw the opportunity, And it's so imperative that Hispanic nurses and nurses of color have a voice in the marketplace, that are acknowledged, that they're recognized, and they're supported. And ultimately, I want to be able to be the bridge between future nurses and having them become nurses, and drive that growth of Hispanic nurses around America. And we've been very fortunate to have a group of nurses of color that we've interviewed, and they've become part of our group of Nurses Bravas, and they represent these communities that you and I are talking about. So when we talk about marketing and marketers, think of healthcare, because these are also patients. And these are patients that are now navigating a system alone in a hospital, where they may need assistance in trying to translate information. The fact that those cultural nuances of having more of that emotion and that hugging and whatever they can do to elevate their emotional stability can be brought to them by these Nurses Bravas. So I'll end on a good note and hope that everyone stays safe and really embracing our health heroes for everything they're doing today.
Wonderful, wonderful. I love that project of love. That is a phenomenal project, and certainly wish you the best with that. And we'll talk offline more. And Gabriela, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. I always know when I see you and when we can get together, there's going to be a long conversation, and this was no exception. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much, and for everything you do, Matt. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon again.
All right. And dear listener, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And please let me know in the comments or direct through the page. Let us know how you enjoyed this episode. And please be sure to reach out to Gabriela as well with any questions you might have. And again, I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the Endless Coffee Cup.